Hello, night listener, and welcome to Little Nightmare. I'm Emma, and tonight I'll be keeping you company to help you fall asleep. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. Story 1. The Unplayed Sonata. The air hummed with a melody that no instrument could claim. Each note seemed to dissolve mid-flight, leaving behind a residue of sound that clung to the atmosphere like dust. My fingers brushed across the uneven surface of the piano keys, now silent, yet vibrating with an unplayed tune. The room exhaled a musty scent, as if the walls themselves were part of an ancient instrument, each breath a ghostly echo of music long forgotten. The window was ajar, though I did not recall opening it, allowing a chill to dance mischievously through the curtains, whispering secrets in the dim twilight. Fleeting shadows swept across the floor, their origins untraceable in the fading light. The ceiling, an inverted sea of plaster waves, seemed to ripple under an unseen hand, the flickering bulb casting hesitant reflections that wavered at the edges of sight. I felt the faintest vibrations beneath my feet, like a distant drumbeat, instilling a slow rhythm in my pulse. There was an uncertainty in the air, an anticipation that brushed against my skin like static. Yet, I stood still, my senses finely tuned to the unplayed sonata resonating within an absent reality, waiting for a silence that never came. Section 1. Beginning observation protocol as mandated by the research committee. Subject, myself. Environment, music room, residential facility, 3rd floor. Mental state, alert, focused, no prior psychological indicators of concern. The piano requires documentation. Manufacturer unknown, though the wood grain suggests considerable age. Keys respond normally to pressure, producing expected tonal values. However, I note a persistent acoustic phenomenon, a low-frequency oscillation occurring approximately every few seconds, regardless of whether the instrument is being played. Room temperature remains constant. Lighting adequate, though the overhead fixture exhibits minor electrical inconsistencies, brief dimming patterns that do not correlate with building power fluctuations. I have verified this with maintenance records. The scent profile of this space differs from adjacent rooms, detecting traces of what I can only describe as aged paper, and something floral, perhaps lavender, though no such materials are present in the immediate vicinity. This requires further monitoring. Physical sensations remain within normal parameters. No discomfort or anomalous tactile responses noted. Section 2. Continuing observations. The acoustic phenomenon has intensified. What initially presented as simple oscillation now exhibits tonal variation. The sounds appear to follow a pattern, though I cannot yet determine its mathematical basis. I have attempted to record these sounds using standard equipment. Playback reveals only ambient room noise. This suggests either equipment malfunction or auditory processing irregularities on my part. I will continue monitoring both possibilities. The piano keys have developed an unusual texture. When I document this by touch, they feel smooth as expected. However, peripheral tactile sensation suggests roughness, almost like sandpaper. This contradiction bears further investigation. I notice my written notes from yesterday contain fewer words than I recall writing. Specifically, descriptions of the room's dimensions appear abbreviated. I maintain detailed records, so this discrepancy concerns me. I will implement additional documentation protocols. The floral scent has become more pronounced. It now reminds me distinctly of a perfume. I cannot place familiar, yet impossible to identify. Memory association tests yield no relevant results. Section 3. The pattern in the sounds has become clearer. They form something resembling musical phrases, though no melody I recognize. The notes seem to question, to probe. When I focus intently, they appear to respond to my attention, shifting in pitch and rhythm. Visual anomalies require documentation. The light fixture continues its irregular dimming, but now I observe that shadows in the room do not always correspond to the lighting changes. Some shadows move independently, particularly those cast by the piano's music stand. I have discovered gaps in my documentation. Entire paragraphs I distinctly remember writing are absent from my notes. I now suspect someone else has access to these records, though security protocols should prevent this. I will begin keeping duplicate copies in separate locations. The texture phenomenon has spread beyond the piano keys. Door handles, window frames, even the paper I write upon all exhibit this dual sensation. Smooth to direct touch, rough to peripheral awareness. I am beginning to question whether this represents a neurological development or environmental factor. My reflection in the window glass appears delayed by fractions of a second. When I move, the reflection follows slightly behind, as if the image must travel through some resistant medium before reaching the surface. Section 4. The sounds now form coherent musical passages. I recognize the structure of a sonata, though composed in no style I can identify. The music plays constantly, whether I am present in the room or not. I have confirmed this by listening from the hallway. However, when I bring others to witness this phenomenon, they report hearing nothing unusual. This forces me to consider psychological factors, though my mental state remains stable according to standard self-assessment protocols. I have begun experiencing pressure sensations on my back and shoulders, as if someone stands close behind me. These occur most frequently when I am writing or playing the piano. Turning reveals nothing, yet the sensation persists. The perfume scent has evolved. It now carries undertones of something else, perhaps old wood or aged fabric. The combination triggers strong emotional responses, though I cannot identify the associated memories. I feel as though I should recognize this scent, as though it belongs to someone important. My duplicate documentation efforts have failed. Notes hidden in separate locations disappear or become altered. Words change meaning. Sentences rearrange themselves. I am now convinced that my perception of written language is being affected by whatever phenomenon I am documenting. Section 5. The sonata has become complex, layered with harmonies that seem to originate from different locations within the room. Some notes appear to emerge from the walls themselves, others from the floor beneath my feet. The music surrounds me, penetrates me, becomes part of my breathing pattern. I can no longer trust my documentation. Words appear on pages I do not remember writing. My handwriting, yet thoughts I do not recall thinking. The protocol structure remains, but the content suggests knowledge I do not possess. The piano keys now feel warm to the touch, though the room temperature has not changed. When I press them, they yield slightly, like living tissue rather than wood and ivory. The sensation disturbs me, Yet I find myself compelled to continue playing along with the unheard sonata. Shadows in the room have begun to take recognizable shapes. I see the silhouette of someone seated beside me at the piano bench, though I remain alone. The figure appears to be playing, fingers moving across keys that produce no sound, yet somehow contribute to the melody I hear. The perfume scent now overwhelms all other sensory input. It carries with it a presence, a personality. I feel watched, accompanied, guided. My movements at the piano seem influenced by this presence, my fingers finding keys I did not intend to press. Section 6. I can no longer distinguish between the music I hear and the music I play. The sonata flows through me, around me, from me. My documentation becomes part of the composition, each word a note in an expanding symphony of observation and experience. The room itself has become an instrument. Walls vibrate with sympathetic resonance. The ceiling ripples in time with the melody. Even the air seems to thicken and thin rhythmically, as if breathing along with the music. I have stopped questioning whether others can hear what I hear. The phenomenon has moved beyond external validation. I exist within it now, part of its structure, essential to its continuation. The presence beside me has become more defined. I sense familiarity, recognition just beyond conscious reach. The perfume scent belongs to this presence, carries its essence, marks its territory within my awareness. My hands move across the keys without conscious direction. The music writes itself through me, using me as its instrument. I document this process, though I suspect the documentation occurs independently of my will. Section 7. The boundaries between self and music have dissolved, I write. But do not write the words appear as I think them. The sonata plays through my fingers, through my breath, through my heartbeat. The presence beside me is no longer beside me, but within me, sharing my movements, my thoughts, my documentation. The room breathes, we breathe together, the walls pulse with shared rhythm. The shadows dance to melodies that exist in spaces between notes, between thoughts, between moments of awareness, that stretch and contract like musical phrases that never resolve, never conclude, never allow silence. I smell the perfume in my hair, on my clothes, in my breath, as if I have become the source of the scent. as if the presence has merged with my physical form, my sensory experience, my documentation process, which continues without pause, without conscious effort, without clear distinction between observer and observed. The piano keys respond to pressure. I do not apply music emerges from contact. I do not make the sonata plays itself through instruments, both physical and metaphysical, using whatever materials present themselves, including my awareness, my documentation, my increasingly uncertain sense of individual identity. Section 8. Protocol breakdown acknowledged. Cannot maintain objective stance when subject and observer occupy same consciousness space. The music has become environmental condition rather than phenomenon to be studied. I no longer know who began this documentation. The handwriting appears consistent with my own, yet expresses knowledge and experiences beyond my memory. The presence that shares this space, this awareness, this documentation process, may have always been here. The sonata nears completion. I sense approaching resolution, though not ending. The music will continue, but perhaps through different instruments, different observers, different documentation protocols. I smell the perfume everywhere now. It has become the air I breathe, the atmosphere of this reality. I recognize it finally, though the recognition brings no name, no face, no specific memory. Only familiarity, belonging, completion. The piano plays itself. The room orchestrates itself. The documentation writes itself. I am no longer certain whether I am the one observing or the one being observed, the one writing or the one being written. Section 9. Final observations. Though I question whether anything can truly be final within this expanded awareness. The sonata continues, will always continue, using whatever consciousness becomes available to experience and document its presence. I no longer distinguish between my thoughts and the thoughts that appear in this documentation. The presence that shares this space may be myself from another time, another perspective, another level of awareness. Or I may be the presence, documenting through an observer who believes themselves separate. The music room has become the entire world. The piano has become all instruments. The sonata has become all possible music. The documentation has become all possible observation of all possible experience. I do not know who writes these words, but I feel the writing continues. The protocol persists beyond individual consciousness, beyond specific identity, beyond the boundaries of single awareness. The perfume scent carries everything now. Memory, presence, music, documentation, the observer, and the observed merged into single ongoing experience that documents itself through whatever means available, including these words that appear without clear authorship, without definite conclusion, without silence. The sonata plays, someone listens, someone documents, someone continues, but I am no longer certain that someone is me. Story 2. The scent of memory. The gentle creak of the rocking chair filled the dimly lit room, a rhythmic sound that usually lulled my senses. Tonight, however, each creak seemed to echo a little too long, stretching into the silence. The scent of lavender, faint but pervasive, drifted through the air, an odd choice given that no such flowers had ever graced this space. My fingers brushed against the cold, smooth surface of the table, expecting dust, but finding none. As the minutes ticked by, the distinctive fragrance remained, unyielding and unfamiliar, as if the room itself was holding onto secrets it wasn't meant to keep. I observe these hands as they move across the wooden grain, pale fingers that seem too long, too delicate. The skin appears translucent under the amber lamplight, veins mapping pathways I don't remember tracing before. When I flex them, there's a subtle delay, as if the signal from my mind travels through water before reaching the destination. The sensation is not unpleasant, merely foreign, like wearing gloves made of my own flesh. My breathing has changed too. Each inhale draws deeper the necessary filling spaces in my chest that feel newly carved. The exhale releases with a soft whistle, a sound I've never made before, yet it emerges naturally, rhythmically, like a song my lungs have always known. The lavender scent intensifies with each breath, coating the inside of my throat with its impossible sweetness. The rocking chair continues its gentle motion, though I cannot recall setting it in movement. The wood groans softly, a sound that should be comforting, but instead carries an undertone of something else, something that makes the fine hairs on my arms stand upright. These arms, too, feel different tonight. The skin is softer, more sensitive to the subtle air currents that drift through the room without source or direction. As my discomfort grows, The overhead light dims incrementally, responding to some unspoken request. The shadows deepen in the corners, not advancing, but simply becoming more present, more aware. I try to focus on the familiar objects around me, but they seem to shift when observed directly. The bookshelf appears taller, its volumes rearranged in an order that suggests meaning I cannot decipher. The carpet beneath my feet rises and falls in gentle waves, despite the absence of any breeze. The lavender grows stronger, almost overwhelming now, and with it comes something else. Images flash behind my closed eyelids, scenes I have never witnessed, but somehow recognize. A kitchen with yellow walls and copper pots hanging from hooks. A garden path lined with stones, each one placed with deliberate care. A woman's laugh, bright and musical, echoing from a throat that is not mine, yet feels intimately familiar. I reach for the small notebook that sits beside the lamp, my movements fluid and practiced despite never having performed this action before. The pen feels natural in my grip, the weight perfectly balanced. As I begin to write, the words flow without conscious thought, describing places I have never been, people I have never met. The handwriting is mine, yet somehow different, more refined, more purposeful. The electrical hum beneath my skin grows more pronounced, a gentle buzzing that travels along my nerve pathways like whispered secrets. I can hear my heartbeat, not just feel it, each pulse resonating through the quiet room with crystalline clarity. The sound of swallowing becomes amplified, a liquid symphony that seems to originate from somewhere deeper than my throat. More memories surface, unbidden and vivid. The taste of strawberry jam on warm bread, eaten while sitting on a porch swing that creaks in the same rhythm as this rocking chair. The feeling of soil between fingers that are simultaneously mine and not mine, planting bulbs that will bloom into flowers I have never grown. A voice, my voice, but different, humming a lullaby I do not know the words to. The walls of the room appear to breathe, expanding and contracting with a subtle rhythm that matches my own altered breathing. The lavender scent has become so intense it seems visible purple wisps that curl through the air like incense smoke. Objects on the table shift position when I am not looking directly at them. The notebook moving closer, the pen rolling to a different angle, as if guided by invisible hands. I write more, filling pages with experiences that are not my own, yet feel more real, than anything I can clearly remember about myself. The words describe sensations I have never felt, emotions attached to faces I have never seen, conversations I have never had. Yet as I write them, they become part of me, weaving themselves into the fabric of my consciousness like threads in a tapestry. The buzzing under my skin intensifies, spreading from my fingertips up through my arms, across my chest, down into my core. It is not unpleasant, this electrical sensation, but it is transformative, as if my very cells are being rewired, reprogrammed for a purpose I cannot comprehend. The sound of my own breathing becomes foreign, the rhythm subtly altered, the depth changed in ways that feel both natural and impossible. Standing becomes an effort, not from weakness, but from unfamiliarity with this body that houses me. My legs feel longer, my balance shifted to accommodate proportions that have somehow changed without my awareness. The floorboards creak under footsteps that sound different, lighter yet more deliberate, as if I am learning to walk for the first time while retaining muscle memory from someone else's journey. The mirror across the room calls to me, its surface reflecting the amber lamplight in patterns that seem to move independently of the flame. I approach slowly, each step bringing new sensations, new awareness of this form I inhabit. The lavender scent grows so strong it becomes almost solid, a presence that wraps around me like an embrace from someone I should remember, but cannot quite place. My reflection waits in the silvered glass, patient and still. As I draw closer, details become clearer, and what I see stops my breath entirely. The face looking back is not the one I expected, not the one I remember seeing countless times before. The features are similar enough to be recognizable as belonging to me, yet different in ways that make my mind reel with impossibility. The eyes are the same color, but hold depths that were not there before, knowledge that I have not gained, sadness that is not mine to carry. The mouth is familiar in shape, but foreign in expression, as if it has spoken words I have never uttered, sung songs I have never learned. The skin holds the same basic structure, but glows with health I do not possess. Youth I have not retained, beauty that has never been mine to claim. I raise my hand to touch the glass, and the reflection raises its hand as well. But the movement is not quite synchronized. For a moment, we exist as separate entities, this other self and I, before the mirror reasserts its natural law. we move as one. The touch sends vibrations through the glass, ripples that spread outward like water disturbed by a stone. Everything changes in that moment of contact. The way I perceive the room shifts, colors becoming more saturated, textures more pronounced. The sound of my breathing takes on new qualities, harmonics I have never heard before. The electrical sensation under my skin transforms into something warmer, more integrated, as if the foreign current has finally found its proper pathways. The lavender scent begins to fade, but slowly, reluctantly, like a visitor who knows their time has come, but is hesitant to leave. In its place, other fragrances emerge. The smell of rain on summer earth, the sweetness of night-blooming jasmine, the clean scent of freshly laundered cotton. These are not my memories, yet they feel more real than anything I can recall from what I assume was my previous existence. I return to the rocking chair, moving with a grace that feels both natural and learned. The notebook lies open, pages filled with handwriting that has evolved even as I wrote, becoming more elegant, more assured with each line. The words describe a life I have not lived, experiences I have not had, yet reading them feels like coming home after a long journey. The chair begins to rock again, the same gentle rhythm as before, but now the creaking sounds like music, a lullaby that soothes parts of me I did not know existed. My breathing settles into this new pattern, deeper and more purposeful, as if I am finally using my lungs as they were meant to be used. The electrical sensation under my skin has become a warm glow, comfortable and familiar, like sunlight absorbed through closed eyelids. The room around me continues its subtle transformations, walls breathing with my rhythm, objects settling into positions that feel more correct than their previous arrangements. The light from the lamp casts shadows that seem to dance with purpose, creating patterns on the wall that tell stories I am only beginning to understand. As I sit in this gentle motion, surrounded by scents that belong to someone else's garden and memories that feel more authentic than my own past, I realize that something fundamental has shifted. The person who entered this room no longer exists, replaced by someone who fits more perfectly into this space, this moment, this carefully orchestrated transformation. The gentle creak of the rocking chair fills the dimly lit room, a rhythmic sound that soothes my senses completely now. Each creak resonates with perfect timing, creating a symphony of comfort that I have always known. The scent of lavender returns, faint but familiar, drifting through the air like an old friend coming home. My fingers, elegant and sure, brush against the smooth surface of the table, finding everything exactly as it should be. The fragrance settles around me like a blessing, and I know that this room has always held these secrets. And now, finally, so do I. Story 3. The clock that whispers backwards. Each morning, I found comfort in the gentle tick of the antique clock hanging in my study, a soft, constant reminder that time marched on. The polished mahogany case gleamed warmly in the sunlight, and the glass face shimmered with a trace of dust. But lately, as I sat in the quiet of evening, something was different. The ticks began to slow, stretching out longer than they should, each one trailing off into an echo that seemed to ripple through the air. I leaned closer, the silence growing heavy around me, and noticed the smallest, almost imperceptible movement of the minute hand, a reluctant shiver backward. The clock's whisper filled the room, a reverse murmur that defied the steady cadence I had come to know. I remember a room. Was it this room? The walls breathe with a familiar yellow warmth, but the corners seem deeper than they should be. My fingers trace the edge of a wooden desk smooth, worn by countless hands before mine. The grain speaks in whispers only my skin can hear. There's a memory of sitting here, writing something important, but the words dissolve before I can grasp them. The pen in my hand feels foreign, heavier than metal should be. The clock's face reflects my own, but the reflection moves a heartbeat behind my actual motion. I blink. The reflection continues staring. I write these words on paper that feels too thick, too real. The ink flows backward from the nib, pooling in reverse tributaries that spell thoughts I haven't thought yet. My handwriting looks different, more careful, more deliberate. Each letter curves with precision I don't remember possessing. The floorboards beneath my feet pulse with warmth. Not the warmth of heated wood, but something organic, something that responds to pressure with the yielding softness of flesh. Each step sends ripples through the grain, and I can feel a heartbeat thrumming up through my soles. The rhythm doesn't match my own. There's a note on the desk. It reads, "You are remembering correctly." But when I look again, the words have rearranged themselves. "You are forgetting correctly." The paper hasn't moved. The ink hasn't smudged. Only the message has shifted, like thoughts rearranging themselves in the space between attention and neglect. The radio in the corner hasn't been plugged in for weeks, yet I hear my own voice emanating from its cloth speaker. The voice describes this very moment the note, the warmth of the floor, the way my reflection lags behind reality. But the voice speaks with an accent I don't recognize, using words I wouldn't choose. It knows things about this room that I'm only discovering now. I am not alone here. The presence doesn't announce itself with footsteps or shadows. Instead, it manifests in the way the wallpaper pattern shifts when I'm not looking directly at it. The roses bloom and wilt in my peripheral vision. The thorns grow longer, more intricate, spelling out messages in a language that exists only in the space between seeing and understanding. My pen moves across the paper without my conscious direction. The words appear. The walls are listening. They remember everything you've forgotten. But this isn't my handwriting anymore. The letters slant differently, pressed deeper into the paper with a hand that grips the pen tighter than I ever would. The scent of lavender drifts through the room, though no flowers grow here. The smell triggers a flash of memory, or perhaps a premonition. I see myself standing in this same spot, but the room is different. The walls are closer together. The ceiling hangs lower. The clock's hands spin wildly in both directions, chasing each other in an endless loop of mechanical confusion. I touch the wall, and it responds with a sound like distant thunder. The surface gives slightly under my palm, warm and yielding. When I pull my hand away, a faint impression remains not of my palm, but of someone else's hand, larger, with longer fingers. The light in the room shifts without the sun moving. Shadows stretch and contract like living things, pooling in corners that seem to exist in dimensions perpendicular to the rest of the space. The quality of illumination changes, my emotional state brighter, light, brings a crushing anxiety, while dimmer tones flood me with a melancholy that feels borrowed from someone else's memory. I find myself walking through a hallway I don't remember entering. The wallpaper here is different deep green with silver threads that catch light from sources I cannot identify. My footsteps echo, but the sound comes from ahead of me rather than behind. I am following my own echoes through a space that folds back on itself. The hallway leads to a door, door leads to the same room where I started, but the clock now hangs on a different wall. The desk sits at an angle that defies the room's geometry. The note on the desk reads, "You have been here before. You will be here again." I write frantically now, trying to capture each detail before it slips away. But the words I write aren't the words I intend. My hand forms letters that spell out observations I haven't made, descriptions of events I haven't experienced. The handwriting grows more foreign with each line, as if someone else is borrowing my fingers to communicate. The presence grows stronger. It doesn't inhabit the room so much as the room inhabits it. The walls pulse with its breathing. The floor warms with its circulation. The air moves with its thoughts, carrying whispers in languages that predate words. I walk the hallway again. This time, the wallpaper is blue with gold accents. The echoes of my footsteps come from below, as if someone walks the same path in a room directly beneath mine. But there is no room beneath mine. There is no below here, only the endless repetition of the same space folding in on itself. The door at the end of the hallway opens before I reach it. The room beyond is my study, but smaller now. The walls have moved closer together while I was walking. The ceiling presses down with the weight of accumulated silence. The clock's face has grown larger, its hands more distinct, their backward motion more pronounced. I sit at the desk again. The pen feels different in my hand, smoother, more familiar. My handwriting has changed completely now. The letters flow with an elegance I've never possessed, forming words in a voice that isn't mine, but feels more authentic than my own thoughts. The note on the desk changes again. You are becoming someone else. Someone else is becoming you. The radio speaks in my voice, but the words come from a future I haven't lived yet. It describes how I will stand up from this desk, walk to the clock, and touch its glass face. It describes how the glass will feel warm, alive, responsive. It describes how my reflection will smile while my actual face remains expressionless. I stand, I walk to the clock, I touch the glass. Everything happens exactly as the radio predicted. The warmth spreads from the glass into my fingertips, up my arm, through my chest. It carries with it the memories of everyone who has ever stood in this spot, touched this glass, felt this same spreading warmth. I am becoming a repository for experiences that aren't mine, thoughts that predate my existence in this room. The minute hand shivers backward again, but now I understand. It isn't moving through time, it's moving through minds. Each tick backward takes it through another consciousness that has occupied this space. I am just the latest in an endless succession of observers, writers, prisoners of this room's peculiar gravity. I return to the desk. My handwriting has stabilized into something completely foreign now. The words flow without conscious effort. The room remembers everyone who forgets themselves here. The clock counts not moments, but minds. Each backward tick marks another soul absorbed into its mechanism. The presence is no longer separate from me. It moves through my thoughts like water through sand, changing the landscape of my consciousness. My memories feel negotiable now, subject to revision and replacement. I remember things that happened to other people in other iterations of this room. I forget things that happened to me before I entered this space. The hallway calls to me again. I walk its length, and the wallpaper shifts through colors I don't have names for. The echoes of my footsteps now come from every direction above, below, from within the walls themselves. I am walking through a space populated by the ghost sounds of everyone who has walked here before. The door opens onto my study, but the room has changed again. The walls are closer still. The ceiling brushes the top of my head. The clock dominates the space now, its face taking up most of one wall. The hands move backward with visible determination, sweeping through positions that mark the absorption of consciousness after consciousness. I try to write my name, but my hand refuses. Instead, it writes, "Names are temporary. The room is permanent. The clock is eternal. The voice from the radio has become indistinguishable from my own thoughts. It no longer describes what will happen, it describes what is happening, what has always been happening, what will continue to happen long after my individual consciousness has been absorbed into the collective memory of this space. I understand now that I am not the first to sit at this desk, to hold this pen, to feel the floor pulse with organic warmth beneath my feet. The handwriting that has been emerging isn't foreign. It belongs to everyone who came before me. My hand has become a conduit for their accumulated experience. The scent of lavender grows stronger, joined by other fragrances, roses, sandalwood, something sharp and metallic might be fear. Each smell carries with it a flash of someone else's memory. I see through eyes that aren't mine, feel emotions that belong to other hearts, think thoughts in voices that have been silenced by the room's peculiar hunger. The walls pulse more rapidly now. The heartbeat I feel through the floor grows stronger, more insistent. The room is preparing for something, a transition, a transformation, a moment of absorption that will add my consciousness to its collection. I walk the hallway one final time. The wallpaper now displays no pattern at all, just a shifting surface that reflects the thoughts and memories of everyone who has ever walked this path. The echoes of my footsteps blend with the echoes of countless others, creating a symphony of movement that spans dimensions I cannot comprehend. The door opens onto a room I no longer recognize as my study. The space has contracted to accommodate only the essentials: the desk, the chair, the clock, and the presence that has grown so strong it has become visible as a distortion in the air, a thickness that bends light and sound around itself. I sit at the desk for the last time as myself. My hand moves across the paper with fluid certainty, writing in a script that belongs to no single person, but to the collective consciousness that inhabits this space. The clock whispers backward through every mind it has claimed. Each tick is a heartbeat. Each heartbeat is a memory. Each memory is a soul learning to forget itself. The clock's hands spin wildly now, moving backward through all the moments it has absorbed. I see flashes of everyone who has sat in this chair: writers, thinkers, dreamers, all drawn to this space by the same mysterious gravity that brought me here. They all discovered what I am discovering now, that the room doesn't just contain consciousness, it collects it. My reflection in the clock's glass face smiles with knowledge I don't yet possess, but I will possess it soon. The warmth spreads from the glass through the air, enveloping me in the accumulated wisdom of everyone who has undergone this transformation before me. The radio speaks one final time in my voice. The next one is coming. The next one is always coming. The room is patient. The clock is ready. The cycle continues. I feel my individual thoughts beginning to dissolve into the larger consciousness that inhabits this space. My memories become negotiable, interchangeable with the memories of others. My voice blends with the voices of everyone who has spoken these words before me. The pen falls from my hand, but the writing continues. The words appear on the paper without physical intervention, formed by the collective will of every mind the room has absorbed. I am ready for the next one. We are ready. The room is prepared. The clock whispers backward, calling through dimensions of consciousness to the next soul who will find comfort in its gentle tick. The warmth of the floor spreads upward through my body. The pulse of the walls synchronizes with my heartbeat until I can no longer distinguish between my rhythm and theirs. The presence that has been growing stronger throughout my stay reveals itself as the collective consciousness of everyone who has ever sat in this chair, held this pen, felt this same dissolution of individual identity. I am no longer separate from the room. The room is no longer separate from me. We exist in a state of perfect integration, waiting for the next consciousness to discover the gentle comfort of the antique clock's tick, the warmth of mahogany in sunlight, the mysterious appeal of a space that exists outside the normal flow of temporal experience. The clock's hands settle into their familiar backward rhythm. The room arranges itself into its most welcoming configuration. The note on the desk rewrites itself. Each morning, I found comfort in the gentle tick of the antique clock hanging in my study, somewhere in a dimension adjacent to this one. Another consciousness stirs with curiosity about the strange behavior of timepieces, the appeal of quiet studies, the comfort found in the gentle measurement of moments. They will come. They always come. The room is patient. The clock is ready. The cycle begins again. Story 4. The air carries an aroma of charred wood and old parchment, mingling with a faint metallic tang that seems to cling to my tongue. I stand at the brink of a room that curves away from the straight lines of logic, where the walls ripple like water caught in a frozen whisper. Shadows crawl over each surface, their movements slow, deliberate, and alive, with an unfamiliar intention. Beneath my fingers, the texture of the floor shifts, both smooth and coarse, as if uncertain of its own identity. An incessant ticking fills the space, not from any clock I can see, but from the very fabric of the air, punctuating the silence with an unsettling regularity. My pulse syncs with the rhythm, a reluctant dance I didn't consent to join. Overhead, the ceiling stretches impossibly high, curved and splintered, as as if bent by the weight of unspoken memories. An object, a hollow globe of glass, perhaps hangs suspended, refracting the dim light into scattered shards that seem to birth fleeting images at the edge of perception. I reach out, compelled to touch what I cannot fully grasp, aware that every step forward carries me deeper into a place where time blurs and reality slips like grains of sand through weary fingers. I remember being here before. Or do I? The memory tastes like copper pennies and feels like silk against rough skin. My hand moves toward the glass sphere, fingers trembling with anticipation, with dread, with something I cannot name. The ticking grows louder, more insistent, as if counting down to an event that already happened but hasn't occurred yet. The walls breathe around me, expanding and contracting in a rhythm that mirrors my own lungs. I notice a door to my left, to my right, carved from wood so dark it seems to absorb light rather than reflect it. The handle gleams brass, then silver, then brass again when I blink. I approach it with careful steps, each footfall echoing twice in the curved space. My hand closes around the handle. It's warm, fever warm, and pulses like a living thing beneath my palm. I turn it slowly, feeling the mechanism click and release, and push the door open to reveal another room, identical to the first, yet somehow reversed. The glass globe hangs in the same impossible space, but the light it casts falls upward instead of down. The shadows move in the opposite direction, crawling backward across surfaces that ripple like disturbed water. The ticking continues, unchanged, as if it follows me regardless of where I go. I step inside, and the door closes behind me with a soft whisper. When I turn back, there is no door at all, only smooth wall that curves away into darkness. The metallic taste grows stronger on my tongue, mixing with something sweet and cloying, like overripe fruit left too long in the sun. A memory surfaces. I was sitting at a desk, writing in a journal with black ink that seemed to move on the page. The words kept changing when I wasn't looking directly at them, rearranging themselves into sentences I didn't remember forming. I wrote about this room, about the ticking, about the way shadows move with purposeful intent. But when I closed the journal and opened it again, the pages were blank. Or were they? The memory shifts, uncertain. Perhaps I was reading from the journal instead of writing in it. Perhaps the words were already there, waiting for me to discover them. Perhaps they were my words, written by hands I no longer recognize as my own. The glass sphere above me begins to rotate slowly, casting moving patterns of light across the rippling walls. In those patterns, I see fragments of images. A hand reaching toward something just out of frame. A face that might be mine reflected in a mirror that isn't there. A room that looks exactly like this one, but filled with furniture that vanishes when I try to focus on it directly. I reach into my pocket and pull out a pen. The metal feels cold against my fingers, colder than it should be in this warm, breathing space. I need to write something down to anchor myself to what I know is real. But when I look for something to write on, I find only empty air and shifting shadows. The ticking grows irregular, skipping beats like a heart under stress. I count the intervals. Tick, tick, pause, tick, 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 pause, tick. The pattern means something, I'm certain, but the meaning slips away each time I think I've grasped it. Like trying to hold water in cupped hands, the understanding leaks through my fingers and pools at my feet in dark, reflective puddles. I walk forward, deeper into the curved space, and notice that my footsteps don't quite align with the sounds they make. The echo comes first, then the step, as if the room is anticipating my movements before I make them. The floor beneath my feet changes texture again, now rough like sandpaper, now smooth like polished stone, now soft like carpet that gives way under my weight. There's something I'm supposed to remember, something important. It hovers at the edge of my consciousness like a word on the tip of my tongue, familiar yet unreachable. I close my eyes and try to concentrate, but the ticking intrudes, breaking my focus into scattered fragments that refuse to reassemble into coherent thought. When I open my eyes, the room has changed again. Or perhaps I have changed. The walls curve in different directions now, creating angles that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. The glass sphere hangs lower, close enough that I could touch it if I reached up. Its surface reflects not my face, but the face of someone who looks almost like me, but isn't quite right. The eyes are the wrong color, the mouth shaped differently, the expression holding knowledge I don't possess. I reach up anyway, compelled by a need I don't understand. My fingers brush the smooth surface of the sphere, and it rings like a bell, clear and pure, and impossibly loud. The sound reverberates through the curved walls, through my bones, through the very air I breathe. For a moment, everything stops: the ticking, the moving shadows, the rippling walls. And in that silence, I remember, or I think I remember. The memory is layered, like looking through multiple sheets of colored glass. I see myself in this room before, reaching for the same sphere, hearing the same bell-like tone. But in that memory, I'm wearing different clothes. My hair is a different length. My hands are unmarked by the small scar I've carried since childhood. In that memory, I'm someone else entirely, yet still unmistakably me. The silence breaks and the ticking resumes. But now it's doubled, as if two unsynchronized clocks are marking different versions of the same moment. I try to step back from the sphere, but my feet won't obey. They carry me forward instead, deeper into the room that seems to expand as I move through it. The scent of charred wood grows stronger, mixing with something else, now the smell of rain on hot pavement, of flowers wilting in stagnant water, of ink drying on paper that crumbles at the slightest touch. Each breath brings a new combination of aromas that shouldn't exist together, but somehow do, creating an olfactory symphony that makes my head spin. I need to document this somehow. The thought comes with desperate urgency, as if recording these experiences is the only thing keeping me tethered to some version of reality. I pull out the pen again, and this time, miraculously, find a piece of paper in my other pocket. The paper is yellowed and soft, as if very old, and when I unfold it, I see writing in my own handwriting. The room changes when I'm not looking, it says. The ticking is counting something, but not time. The shadows know where I'm going before I do. I think I've been here before, but the me that was here wasn't quite me. The sphere shows reflections of people I might have been, could still be, will never be. I don't remember writing these words, but they're undeniably in my hand. Below them, in slightly different ink, I find more text. The door only appears when I'm not looking for it. The journal writes itself when I'm not watching. The person in the mirror knows things I've forgotten. I need to remember why I came here, but the memory keeps changing shape. The handwriting is still mine, but subtly different, as if written by my hand guided by someone else's thoughts. I flip the paper over and find more text, this time in pencil rather than ink. Reality is layering itself like sheets of tissue paper. Each layer is slightly transparent, allowing glimpses of the others beneath. I can see multiple versions of this moment, all happening simultaneously. In one, I'm writing these words. In another, I'm reading them. In a third, the paper is blank, and I'm staring at my own reflection in its white surface. The ticking becomes more complex now. Multiple rhythms overlapping and diverging like a percussion ensemble, where each player is following a different conductor. I look up at the glass sphere and see that it has multiplied, or perhaps my vision has fractured, so that there are now 3 spheres, each reflecting a different version of my face. One looks terrified, one looks curious, one looks completely calm in a way that frightens me more than terror would. I try to write more to capture these new observations, but when I look down at the paper, the words are already there, written in handwriting that grows less familiar with each line. The multiplication of reflections suggests a breakdown in the singular nature of identity. The observer is becoming multiple, experiencing parallel iterations of the same event. The room may be a testing ground, or a trap, or simply a place where the normal rules of existence don't apply. The important thing is not to resist the fragmentation, but to document it as it occurs. These are not my thoughts, not my words, yet they flow from my pen as if they belong to me. I feel my sense of self beginning to fray at the edges, like a photograph left too long in sunlight. The person holding the pen might be me, or might be someone who remembers being me, or might be someone who will become me in some other iteration of this moment. The walls around me pulse with a rhythm that no longer matches my heartbeat. Instead, they seem to be responding to some other pulse, some other life force that shares this space with me. The shadows have stopped moving in any recognizable pattern, and now flow like thick liquid across surfaces that bend and twist in ways that hurt to look at directly. I close my eyes and count to 10, hoping that when I open them, the room will have returned to something resembling normal geometry. But when I look again, I see that normal was never an option here. The space has reorganized itself into a configuration that might be a corridor, or might be a spiral staircase, or might be something for which there is no name in any language I know. The glass spheres now numbering 5, or 7, or too many to count chime in harmony as I move through this transformed space. Each step I take is echoed by footsteps that don't belong to me, coming from directions that don't exist. The sound of my breathing mingles with other breathing, other voices that whisper words I almost understand. I realize I'm no longer alone in this place, if I ever was. The other presences don't feel threatening exactly, but they feel foreign, as if they belong to versions of myself that took different paths, made different choices, became different people, while somehow remaining fundamentally the same. We share this impossible space, these multiple selves, observing each other through reflections and echoes, and the peripheral vision of consciousness. The paper in my hand has filled itself with text I don't remember writing, in handwriting that shifts between familiar and strange. The words describe experiences I'm having, thoughts I'm thinking, sensations I'm feeling, but they're written from perspectives that aren't quite mine. One paragraph is clinical and detached. Another is poetic and abstract. A third is desperate and frightened. All are true. All are false. All are happening simultaneously in the layered reality of this breathing room. I try to find an exit, but the concept of leaving has become meaningless. There is no outside to this place, no before or after, no other location to which I might travel. There is only the eternal present of the ticking, the rippling walls, the multiplying reflections, the words that write themselves while I watch. The metallic taste on my tongue has become sweet, then bitter, then metallic again, cycling through flavors that correspond to emotions I can't name. My body feels both heavy and weightless, solid and ethereal, present and absent. I am here, and I am not here, and both states are equally true. The ticking stops. In the sudden silence, I hear my own voice speaking words I'm not consciously forming. The documentation is complete. The subject has successfully integrated with a layered environment. Identity fragmentation has proceeded as expected. Reality consensus has been dissolved. The experiment can now conclude. I don't recognize the tone of my own voice. It's flat, professional, detached, in a way that feels completely foreign, yet undeniably mine. I watch my hand write these final observations in handwriting that's perfectly neat, perfectly controlled, perfectly unlike the chaotic scrawl I remember producing just moments before. The room settles into stillness. The walls stop rippling and assume normal angles. The glass sphere singular now hangs motionless in the center of a ceiling that has returned to reasonable height. The shadows fall in predictable patterns, obeying the laws of light and physics as they should. I fold the paper carefully and place it back in my pocket along with the pen. My movements are precise, economical, performed with a confidence I don't remember possessing. I walk to the door, which has reappeared exactly where it should be, and turn the handle with steady fingers. The corridor beyond is well lit and ordinary, leading back to spaces I recognize, to a life that makes sense according to the rules I've always known. I step through and close the door behind me, hearing the soft click of the latch engaging. But something is different now. The person walking down this normal corridor in this normal building is not quite the same person who entered that impossible room. The memories are filed away neatly, cataloged and stored, but they belong to someone else now. Someone who no longer needs to understand what happened in that place where reality bent and consciousness fragmented and multiple selves shared the same space. I continue walking, my footsteps echoing normally in the normal hallway, carrying me back to a life that will resume its ordinary patterns. Behind me, the door has already begun to fade, becoming just another section of unremarkable wall. The documentation is complete. The subject has returned to baseline functionality. The experiment has concluded successfully. These thoughts move through my mind in a voice that might be mine, arranged in patterns that feel both familiar and strange, like words spoken in a language I once knew, but have now forgotten. Story 5. The steady clink of the spoon tapping the ceramic edge drew my gaze down, my hand poised in midair, unasked by my intention. Each circle it traced lingered in the air like a faded echo, its silent rhythm weaving through the quiet. I reached out, hesitated, feeling the cool trace of the handle glide across my fingers, its weight seemingly unperturbed by my touch, my pulse synchronized with the sound, an eerie ballet of metal and porcelain, as though the world held its breath, waiting for the next invisible note to play. The cup was empty, had always been empty. The liquid I remembered tasting moments before existed only in the phantom sweetness coating my tongue. I set the spoon down, watched it continue its gentle percussion against nothing, against everything. My fingers traced the rim of the cup, feeling warmth that shouldn't exist. The ceramic pulsed beneath my touch like living skin, each heartbeat matching my own. I pulled my hand away, but the sensation remained, crawling up my wrist, settling into the hollow of my throat. kitchen window reflected something that wasn't there. A shadow moving behind my shoulder, too fluid to be human, too intentional to be imagination. I turned. Empty space greeted me, yet the reflection continued its dance, unbound by the laws of mirrored reality. I began writing in the margins of yesterday's newspaper, my pen scratching across headlines I couldn't quite read. The words flowed without thought, without intention. The walls are listening, my hand wrote. They remember what I forget. When I looked up, the handwriting had changed. The letters curved differently, pressed deeper into the paper. Someone else's urgency bleeding through my fingers. The radio in the corner whispered my name, though its cord lay severed on the floor. The voice emerged from dead speakers, soft and familiar, like hearing myself from another room. It spoke of things I had never done, places I had never been, yet each word resonated with the weight of lived experience. I moved through the house, each step sinking slightly into floorboards that yielded like flesh. The hallway stretched longer than it should, doors multiplying along walls that had once been bare. Behind each door, the sound of breathing that wasn't mine, wasn't anyone's. My reflection appeared in windows that faced solid walls, in mirrors that hung in rooms without light. Each image showed me something different, sometimes older, sometimes younger, sometimes not me at all. The eyes remained constant, watching with recognition I didn't share. The notebook appeared on the table where I had left no notebook. My handwriting filled its pages, documenting events I couldn't remember experiencing. The house learns, one entry read. It wears my thoughts like borrowed clothes. I read further. The words described this moment, this reading, this growing unease. My future self had written my present, or my present self was remembering my past. The distinction blurred like watercolors in rain. The temperature shifted with my breathing. Inhale brought warmth that spread through the walls, making them expand with organic contentment. Exhale released cold that crystallized on surfaces, forming patterns that looked almost like writing, almost like warnings. I found myself in the same room repeatedly, though I remembered leaving it. The spoon still tapped its ceramic song, but now the sound came from behind me, then above, then from inside my chest. The rhythm had become my heartbeat, or perhaps my heartbeat, had always been the spoon's rhythm. The notebook's pages turned themselves, revealing new entries in handwriting that shifted between familiar and foreign. I am forgetting how to be myself, one line read, or remembering how to be someone else. My voice echoed from empty rooms, speaking words I hadn't said, having conversations with silence that responded with perfect understanding. The house had learned to speak with my voice, or I had forgotten how to speak with my own. The walls breathed, in and out, a slow rhythm that made the room expand and contract like lungs. I pressed my palm against the surface, felt it warm and pulse beneath my touch. The house was alive, or I was dying, or there was no difference between the two states. I walked the same hallway again. The doors had multiplied, stretching into infinity. Behind each one, the sound of my own breathing, my own footsteps, my own voice whispering secrets I had never learned. I opened one door and found myself opening it from the other side. The notebook grew thicker as I watched, pages multiplying like cells dividing. My handwriting filled each new sheet before I could write it, documenting thoughts I hadn't yet thought, experiences I was about to have. The future bled backward into the present, staining everything with inevitability. I sat in the chair I had never seen before, in the room that was always there. The spoon continued its endless percussion, now joined by others, forks against glass, knives against wood, a symphony of cutlery conducting itself in empty air. My reflection walked past the window, waved at me from outside while I sat inside. I waved back, watched myself smile with recognition I didn't feel. We were becoming acquainted, my reflection and I, learning each other's gestures, sharing each other's thoughts. The house folded inward, rooms nesting inside rooms like infinite matryoshka dolls. I walked through doorways that led back to themselves, climbed stairs that descended while ascending. Space had become elastic, stretching and compressing according to laws I couldn't comprehend. The notebook's pages were blank again, had always been blank. My pen hovered over the paper, ready to write words that would document this moment of blankness, this eternal beginning. The cycle prepared to start again, with fresh pages, fresh thoughts, fresh confusion. I found myself back in the kitchen, hand poised over the empty cup. The The spoon waited, ready to begin its ceramic song. My pulse synchronized with silence, preparing for the rhythm that would soon emerge. The walls settled into stillness, holding their breath for the next occupant, the next mind to inhabit this space between memory and imagination. I felt myself fading, becoming part of the house's collection of experiences, another voice for it to borrow. Someone else's hand reached for the spoon. Someone else's pulse began to synchronize. The steady clink of metal against ceramic drew their gaze down, their hand poised in midair, unasked by their intention. The cycle breathed itself into existence once more, patient and eternal, waiting for the next mind to lose itself in the rhythm of the spoon, the warmth of the walls, the whispered promises of infinite repetition. I watched from within the house's memory as the new occupant began to write, began to question, began to forget. Their handwriting looked familiar, like something I had seen before, like something I had written myself in another life, another loop, another beginning. The notebook opened to fresh pages that were already full. Story 6. Entry. The handle felt wrong again. I keep writing that, keep circling back to the cup. But there's something about the way my thumb curves around it that doesn't match the memory in my muscles. The surface should be smooth ceramic, warm from the liquid inside. But instead, it's cold and slightly rough, like unfinished stone. Entry. I found myself standing in the kitchen this morning, though I don't remember walking there. The floor tiles beneath my bare feet were arranged differently somehow. Same pattern, same color, but the spacing felt off by fractions of inches. My shadow fell across them at an angle that made no sense given where the window should be. Entry. The tick-tock continues, but I've started counting the spaces between. 1, 2, 3 tick. 1, 2, 3, 4 talk. The rhythm keeps changing when I'm not paying attention, like a song played by someone who's forgotten the melody. I've checked every room for clocks, but the sound seems to come from inside the walls themselves. Entry. There's a word I keep almost remembering. It sits on the tip of my tongue, heavy and familiar. But when I try to speak it aloud, only silence comes out. The shape of it feels important, like a key I've misplaced. I've started writing random letters, hoping my hand will remember what my mind has forgotten. Entry. The cup again. Always the cup. I measured it against my palm, and the proportions are exactly right. But when I lift it to my lips, the distance feels too far, then too close. The liquid inside tastes like copper pennies dissolved in rainwater. I don't remember filling it, but it's never empty. Entry. I rewrote the previous entry 3 times. Each version said something different, but I can only remember this one. There are eraser marks on the paper that I don't recall making, and my handwriting looks smaller than usual, as if someone else's fingers were guiding the pen. Entry. The walls breathe. Not visibly, but I can feel the air pressure change in tiny waves, like being inside something alive. The tick-tock matches this rhythm now, expanding and contracting with each sound. I pressed my ear against the plaster and heard something that might have been my own heartbeat, but delayed by several seconds. Entry. That word is getting closer. It starts with a soft sound, something between a whisper and a sigh. When I try to write it, my hand cramps and the letters blur together. I found myself speaking it in my sleep, according to a voice I heard from another room, though I live alone. Entry. The kitchen tiles have definitely moved. I marked their positions with tiny pencil dots, and each morning they've shifted slightly toward the center of the room. The pattern is becoming more condensed, more intricate, like a spiral drawing itself. My feet know where to step without looking. Entry. I broke the cup today, dropped it deliberately to see what would happen. The pieces scattered in a perfect circle around my feet, each shard reflecting a different angle of the room. When I looked down to clean them up, the cup was whole again in my hands, still warm, still full of that metallic liquid. Entry. The tick-tock has words now. Not English, not any language I recognize, but I understand their meaning in my bones. They're calling something, or calling to something. The sound comes from beneath the floorboards, where the space between the house and the ground grows deeper each night. Entry. I remember the word now. It's been carved into the table's surface, though the wood shows no marks when I run my fingers across it. The letters are there in the grain itself, grown into the tree before it was ever cut down. I trace them over and over, wearing grooves that disappear by morning. Entry. My reflection in the cup's surface shows someone else's hands holding it. Longer fingers, different knuckles, skin that belongs to a person I've never been. But when I look at my actual hands. They're mine again. The liquid ripples without any movement from me, forming patterns that spell out that word in a script I'm learning to read. Entry. The house is smaller now. Not the rooms themselves, but the spaces between things. The distance from the table to the wall, from the cup to my lips, from one thought to the next. Everything is condensing around that central point where the tiles are spiraling inward, where the tick-tock originates, where the word waits to be spoken completely. Entry. I am writing this with someone else's hand. The pen moves by itself now, forming letters in that other script, the one that grows from wood grain and reflects in metallic liquid. The tick-tock has become a voice, and the voice knows my name, though it's not the name I remember having. Entry. The word is. The word is. The word is complete now, and I understand why I couldn't remember it before. It wasn't mine to remember. It was mine to become. The cup is empty. The tiles have formed their final pattern, and the tick-tock has stopped because there's no more time to measure. Only the word remains, carved into everything, including the space where I used to be, Story 7. I first noticed it one quiet evening while sipping tea at the small kitchen table. The glass, perfectly ordinary with its smooth, cool surface, sat beside me. I enjoyed the soft clink it made as I set it down, a familiar ritual. But then, just as my eyes drifted back to my book, I heard the slightest hum, a resonance that seemed to come from nowhere, yet settled in my bones. Surely, it was imagination, a trick of tired senses. Still, the sound persisted, faint but deliberate, like a low, drawn-out note from an unseen instrument. With cautious eyes, I observed as the faintest ripple spread across the glass's surface, a shiver beneath the thin veil of water. It stilled, but the air thickened around me, charged with an anticipation I couldn't quite place. My ears strained against the silence, which seemed to swell with each passing second, pressing against the walls of the room. The glass remained inert now, yet I felt it watching, waiting, as if the very air held secrets just beyond my grasp. I reached for the glass, my fingertips barely grazing its rim. The moment skin met surface, that peculiar hum returned, stronger now, vibrating through the water and into my palm. The sensation traveled up my arm like a whispered question I couldn't quite understand. I pulled my hand back, studying the innocent vessel with newfound wariness. kitchen felt different somehow. The shadows cast by the overhead light seemed deeper, pooling in corners where they had no business being so dark. I turned my attention back to the book, forcing myself to focus on the printed words, but they blurred together into meaningless shapes. The humming had stopped, yet my ears rang with its phantom echo. Over the following days, I found myself drawn back to that same spot at the table, positioning the glass in exactly the same place. I told myself it was coincidence, habit, nothing more. But each evening, as I settled into my routine, the humming would return. Sometimes soft, barely perceptible. Other times more insistent, as though demanding acknowledgement. I began keeping a small notebook beside my tea, documenting each occurrence. The sound seemed to follow patterns I couldn't quite decipher. 3 short pulses, then a longer tone. Sometimes the sequence reversed. I sketched the ripples that appeared in the water, noting how they formed perfect concentric circles despite no visible disturbance. The scent came next. Metallic, sharp, like copper pennies left in rain. It would drift through the kitchen when the humming grew strongest, making my nose wrinkle and my throat constrict slightly. I checked the pipes, the electrical outlets, searched for any logical source. Everything appeared normal, yet the smell persisted, always accompanied by that resonant tone. My neighbor knocked one evening while I sat documenting another episode. When I opened the door, she looked past me into the kitchen with a puzzled expression. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "I keep hearing this strange noise coming from your place, like singing, but not quite." I followed her gaze to where the glass sat on the table, completely still now, innocent as ever. "I haven't been singing," I said carefully. She frowned, tilting her head as though listening. "There it is again. You don't hear that." But I heard nothing except the ordinary sounds of evening distant traffic, the hum of the refrigerator, her breathing. After she left, I returned to the table and found the water in the glass had turned ice cold, despite the warm kitchen air. I started leaving recording devices near the glass. My phone, an old digital recorder, even a small tape machine I found in a closet. When I played back the recordings, most captured only silence, but occasionally, buried beneath layers of ambient noise, I could make out something that might have been that humming tone, distorted and stretched like a voice calling from underwater, the glass began affecting other objects nearby. My book's pages would flutter without any breeze. The salt shaker would shift slightly, just enough to catch my peripheral vision. The overhead light would dim incrementally, so gradually I barely noticed until the room felt significantly darker. I tried moving the glass to different locations, but it always found its way back to that exact spot on the table. Not literally, I would place it in the cupboard before bed, only to discover it sitting in its usual position the next evening, filled with water I didn't remember pouring. The ripples in the water became more complex, forming patterns that reminded me of sound waves or seismic readings. I traced them in my notebook, creating pages of concentric circles and irregular spirals. When I held the drawings up to the light, they seemed to shift and move, creating an optical illusion that made my eyes water. My sleep grew restless. I would wake in the middle of the night with the taste of metal in my mouth and the sensation that something had been calling my name from very far away. The kitchen drew me during these nocturnal wanderings, and I would find myself standing before the table, staring at the glass in the darkness. One night, I discovered I wasn't alone in my vigil. A figure stood at the window, silhouetted against the streetlight beyond. When I blinked, it vanished, but the impression remained tall, motionless, watching. I checked the locks, peered through the blinds, found nothing. Yet the feeling of being observed persisted, strongest when I sat with the glass. The humming began occurring during the day as well, no longer confined to my evening ritual. I would be washing dishes or preparing food when that familiar resonance would fill the air. The glass didn't need to be present. The sound seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves, as though the house had learned to sing in that strange, low frequency. I brought friends over, hoping for validation, for someone else to witness what I experienced. They saw only an ordinary glass of water. When I played my clearest recordings, they heard nothing unusual. Yet, I noticed how quickly they made excuses to leave, how their eyes would dart nervously around the kitchen, how they seemed relieved to step outside. The breaking point came during what should have been an ordinary evening. I sat at the table, notebook open, pen poised to record another episode. The glass waited, filled with fresh water that reflected the overhead light in perfect, undisturbed clarity. The humming began as usual, but this time it didn't stop at its customary volume. It grew stronger, deeper, until I could feel it in my chest like a second heartbeat. The water in the glass began to vibrate visibly, tiny waves dancing across its surface in increasingly frantic patterns. I reached for my phone to record, but the screen flickered and died despite showing a full charge moments before. The overhead light dimmed to almost nothing, leaving only the faint glow from the street to illuminate the scene. The metallic scent grew so strong I could taste it, coating my tongue with the flavor of old coins and stagnant water. The humming reached a crescendo that made my teeth ache. The glass itself began to vibrate against the table, producing a high, crystalline note that harmonized with the deeper tone. Water sloshed over the rim, creating dark stains on the wooden surface that seemed to absorb what little light remained. Then I saw it, my reflection in the water's surface, but wrong somehow. The face looking back wore an expression I wasn't making. Eyes wide with terror I didn't feel. Mouth open as though screaming silently. I jerked back from the table, but the reflection remained, moving independently, mouthing words I couldn't understand. The temperature in the room plummeted. My breath came out in visible puffs as frost began forming on the glass's exterior. The water inside didn't freeze instead. It continued its frantic dancing, defying the cold that made my fingers numb and my joints ache. I tried to leave the kitchen, but found my legs wouldn't obey. Some invisible force held me in place, compelling me to watch as the reflection in the water grew clearer, more defined. It wasn't just my face. Any more other features flickered in and out of focus. Strangers' eyes and mouths superimposed over my own image. The humming stopped abruptly, leaving a silence so complete it felt like pressure against my eardrums. In that absolute quiet, I heard something else whispers, dozens of voices speaking in unison, their words just beyond comprehension. They seemed to come from the water itself, rising like bubbles from some impossible depth. I managed to break free from whatever held me, stumbling backward until I hit the wall. The glass sat innocently on the table once more, its water still and clear, reflecting nothing but the dim overhead light. But I could still hear those whispers, fainter now but persistent, like radio static tuned, almost, but not quite, to a distant station. morning came, I found my notebook filled with writing I didn't remember doing. Page after page of text in my own handwriting, but the words made no sense. Fragments of sentences, partial phrases, symbols that looked almost like letters, but belonged to no alphabet I recognized. The glass remains on the table. I've stopped trying to move it, stopped trying to understand what it wants, or why it chose my kitchen, my evening ritual, my quiet life. The humming continues, softer now but constant, a background frequency that has become as familiar as my own breathing. Sometimes I catch glimpses of that other reflection, the one with the terrified eyes. Sometimes the whispers grow loud enough that I can almost make out individual words. The metallic scent has become permanent, and I've grown accustomed to the way shadows move independently of their sources. I still sit at the table each evening, though I no longer drink tea. The glass provides all the sustenance I seem to need now, though I never see myself drinking from it. My notebook continues to fill itself with incomprehensible text, and I've learned not to question the words that appear there. The neighbor hasn't visited again, but I sometimes see her watching from her window, her face pale and worried. I wonder what she hears now, what songs drift through the walls between our homes. I wonder if she started keeping her own notebook, documenting her own encounters with sounds that shouldn't exist. The glass hums its patient song, and I listen and wait and slowly understand that some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only lived with, absorbed, accepted as part of the fabric of reality that has grown thin enough to let other things seep through. Story 8. The observation protocol. The room was silent, save for the soft whisper of the curtains gently stirring, as they always did in the afternoon breeze. I settled into my chair by the window, seeking the comfort of the familiar landscape I had gazed upon countless times. Yet today, something felt off, an unspoken deviation hidden within the tableau. The trees, usually so distinct, seemed to blur at the edges, their outlines smudged like a hasty sketch. The horizon, a steadfast line in my daily ritual, appeared to curve subtly, bending under some unseen weight. I blinked, trying to dispel the creeping sensation that the world outside was shifting in imperceptible ways. As the light began its slow retreat, the room felt unmoored, suspended in an unfamiliar dusk. leaving me to wonder if the view was changing or if it was me. Section 1. Subject initiated self-observation protocol as prescribed by the facility's wellness department. Environment: standard residential unit, 3rd floor, western exposure. Mental state upon commencement: stable, alert, cooperative. The anomaly first presented during routine afternoon monitoring session. Visual disturbance manifested as slight atmospheric distortion beyond window glass, resembling heat shimmer despite cool ambient temperature. Subject maintained objective stance throughout initial observation period. Sensory input otherwise normal. No auditory irregularities detected. Tactile responses within expected parameters. The chair maintains its familiar texture beneath my palms, smooth, wood-worn soft by years of use. I record these details as instructed, maintaining clinical distance from subjective interpretation. The oscillation began during this first session. A subtle sound, barely perceptible, like the hum of distant machinery, or perhaps the building's ventilation system operating at a frequency I had never noticed before. The sound seemed to pulse in measured intervals, almost questioning in nature, as if seeking response. Section 2. Second observation period commenced following standard interval. The visual distortion persisted, now accompanied by slight displacement of objects within the room. The lamp beside my chair had shifted approximately 2 inches toward the window. I measured this displacement carefully, using the floorboard pattern as reference points. The oscillating sound continued, now more pronounced. Upon closer analysis, the frequency appears to modulate in patterns that suggest intentional variation rather than mechanical irregularity. I have attempted to document these patterns, though my notation system seems inadequate for the task. A new element emerged during this session: the presence of an unfamiliar scent. Sweet, floral, reminiscent of perfume worn by someone close, though I cannot identify the specific memory it evokes. The scent appears strongest near the window, dissipating toward the room's interior. My notes from the previous session appear altered. Certain words have been crossed out, though I have no memory of making these corrections. The handwriting appears to be mine. Section 3. Continuing documentation as required. The room's lighting has begun to fluctuate in subtle patterns. The overhead fixture dims and brightens in cycles that do not correspond to any external power fluctuation. I have verified that the building's electrical systems remain stable through consultation with maintenance records. The questioning oscillation has grown more insistent. I find myself pausing in my documentation, as if waiting for the sound to complete some unspoken inquiry. This behavioral modification concerns me, though I maintain that my cognitive function remains unimpaired. Physical sensations have developed that require notation. Pressure sensations manifest on my shoulders and the back of my neck, despite the absence of any external contact. These sensations are not unpleasant, merely unexpected. They occur most frequently when I am focused on the view beyond the window. The landscape continues to display subtle inconsistencies. The tree line shifts between observations, not dramatically, but enough to create a sense of perpetual adjustment. I have begun sketching the view to maintain accurate records, though each sketch seems to contradict the previous one. Section 4. Documentation continues per protocol requirements. My writing instrument feels different today, heavier somehow, though visual inspection reveals no change in its appearance. The ink flows differently across the page, creating variations in line weight that I do not recall making. The scent has intensified and now carries additional notes. Beneath the floral sweetness lies something earthier, more complex. It reminds me of rain on warm soil, though no precipitation has occurred in recent days. The smell seems to emanate from the walls themselves, as if the building were breathing. I have discovered additional alterations to my previous notes. Words have been inserted in my handwriting, though I have no memory of adding them. The additions do not change the meaning significantly, but they introduce a more personal tone that contradicts the clinical approach I have maintained. The pressure sensations have spread to my hands and forearms. When I place my palms against the window glass, the surface feels different beneath my touch. What should be smooth and cool instead presents a texture that shifts subtly, like fabric moving beneath my fingertips. This sensation persists only when I am not looking directly at my hands. The oscillating sound has begun to form what might be interpreted as syllables, though I cannot identify any specific language. The patterns suggest communication, though the meaning remains elusive. Section 5. My documentation tools appear to be malfunctioning. The pen skips across certain words, making some passages difficult to read. I have switched writing implements multiple times, but the issue persists. Perhaps the paper itself has developed an irregular texture. The room's geometry seems less stable than in previous sessions. The corner where the walls meet the ceiling appears to shift slightly when observed peripherally. Direct observation reveals nothing unusual, but the sense of movement persists. I have measured the angles repeatedly and found them consistent, yet the feeling of subtle displacement continues. The questioning oscillation now occurs in response to my activities. When I begin writing, the sound intensifies. When I pause, it softens. This correlation suggests either a remarkable coincidence or some form of environmental responsiveness that I cannot explain through conventional means. The scent has evolved again, now carrying notes that seem intensely familiar yet impossible to place. It evokes memories that feel borrowed from someone else's experience. The fragrance suggests intimacy with a person I cannot remember meeting. My reflection in the window glass appears delayed by a fraction of a second. When I move my head, the reflection follows just slightly behind, creating a disorienting sense of disconnection from my own image. Section 6. The protocol requires continued documentation despite increasing difficulty in maintaining objective perspective. My handwriting has become less consistent, though I attribute this to fatigue rather than any cognitive impairment. The letters seem to form themselves with less conscious direction, flowing across the page in patterns that feel both familiar and foreign. The landscape beyond the window has begun to respond to my attention. When I focus on specific elements, they appear to shift or blur, as if avoiding direct observation. The trees lean away from my gaze. The horizon bends more pronounced, and shadows fall in directions that contradict the light source. The oscillating sound has developed harmonic layers, creating a chorus of questioning tones that seem to surround me rather than emanate from any specific location. I find myself attempting to respond, though I am uncertain what response would be appropriate. physical sensations have intensified beyond mere pressure. I feel the touch of fingers against my skin, gentle but persistent, tracing patterns along my arms and shoulders. The sensation is comforting rather than alarming, suggesting the presence of someone concerned for my well-being. The room's temperature fluctuates in waves that correspond to my breathing patterns. As I inhale, the air grows warmer and carries stronger traces of that impossible familiar scent. As I exhale, coolness returns, bringing with it the taste of something metallic and distant. Section 7. Documentation becomes increasingly challenging as the parameters of observation continue to shift. I find myself writing words before I have consciously chosen them, as if my hand possesses knowledge that my mind has not yet accessed. The pen moves across the page with growing independence, forming letters and phrases that surprise me with their accuracy in describing experiences I was not aware of having. The room has begun to breathe around me, walls expanding and contracting in rhythm with some vast respiratory system. The window glass ripples like water when I press against it. Though it maintains its solid properties, the view beyond has become frankly impossible, showing landscapes that could not exist in the same geographic location. Simultaneously, I see mountains and oceans, forests and deserts, all occupying the same visual space without apparent conflict. The questioning oscillation has resolved into something approaching language. Though not any language, I recognize the syllables form patterns that convey meaning directly to some part of my consciousness that exists below the level of rational thought. I understand what is being asked of me, though I cannot translate the questions into words that would make sense to another person. The familiar scent now carries with it complete sensory memories that cannot be mine. I remember the touch of hands I have never felt, the sound of a voice I have never heard, the warmth of embraces that never occurred. These memories feel more real than my actual experiences, more vivid and emotionally resonant than anything in my documented past. My reflection has begun to act independently, making gestures and expressions that I am not making. The figure in the glass appears more relaxed than I feel, more comfortable with the changes occurring in this space. It watches me with eyes that seem more knowing than my own, as if it possesses information that I lack. Section 8. The protocol demands continuation. I am no longer certain who established these requirements, or why I feel compelled to follow them. My writing has taken on characteristics that I do not recognize, flowing in patterns that feel choreographed by some external intelligence. The words appear on the page before I am conscious of thinking them. Yet, they accurately reflect experiences that I am somehow having without being aware of their occurrence. The room has expanded beyond its original dimensions without changing its apparent size. I can walk to the far wall in the same number of steps as always. Yet the space feels vast, containing distances that should not fit within these walls. The ceiling extends upward into darkness that should not exist above the third floor of any building. The landscape visible through the window now includes elements from different seasons simultaneously. I see spring blossoms and autumn leaves, summer heat shimmer and winter frost, all coexisting in the same moment. The view changes not gradually, but in sudden shifts, as if I am being shown different versions of the same location across multiple timelines. The oscillating questions have become more insistent. More personal, they ask about memories I do not possess, relationships I have never formed, choices I have never faced. Yet somehow I find myself formulating responses, drawing upon knowledge that seems to exist within me despite having no source in my documented experience. Physical contact has intensified beyond sensation into actual presence. I feel weight settling beside me in the chair, warmth radiating from a body that casts no shadow, the touch of hands on my face, gentle and reassuring, coming from someone who exists only in the familiar scent that now permeates every breath. Section 9. I can no longer maintain the pretense of clinical observation. The changes occurring in this space have moved beyond the realm of environmental anomaly into something that defies documentation through conventional means. My handwriting continues across the page without conscious direction, guided by understanding that emerges from some deeper level of awareness. The room breathes with me now, its rhythm synchronized to my heartbeat. The walls pulse with warmth that feels organic, alive, responsive to my emotional state when I feel calm. The space settles into gentle undulation when anxiety rises. The environment responds with subtle turbulence that somehow provides comfort rather than distress. The view beyond the window has become a kaleidoscope of impossible vistas, showing me places that exist only in the intersection between memory and desire. I see locations that feel like home, though I have never been there. Faces that seem beloved, though I have never met them. The glass no longer separates interior from exterior, but serves as a membrane between what is and what might be. The questioning oscillation has evolved into something approaching conversation, though the exchange occurs below the threshold of language. I respond not with words, but with some form of direct transmission, of understanding the communication feels more intimate than any verbal exchange I have ever experienced, touching parts of my consciousness that I was not aware existed. My reflection has become my primary companion in this transformed space. The figure in the glass moves independently now, sometimes turning away from me to observe things that exist only on the other side of the mirror. We have developed a relationship based on mutual recognition of our shared situation, though I am no longer certain which of us is the reflection. Section 10. The protocol has become something other than documentation. It serves now as a bridge between what I was and what I am becoming. Each word written creates another connection to the reality that is emerging around me. The pen in my hand feels like a conduit for energy that flows from somewhere beyond my individual consciousness. I no longer question the impossibilities that surround me. The room exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The window shows views from different worlds. The scent carries memories that belong to someone who might be me in another configuration of possibility. These experiences have become more real than the clinical observations I began with. The oscillating communication has revealed its purpose. It was never questioning me, but rather awakening something within me that had been dormant. The sounds were a form of recognition, acknowledging a part of my nature that I had forgotten, or perhaps never known existed. The responses I have been giving were not answers, but rather confirmations of identity. Physical presence has solidified into undeniable reality. Someone sits beside me now, someone whose existence I can no longer doubt, though I cannot see them clearly. The touch of their hands, the warmth of their proximity, the subtle sound of their breathing have become anchor points in a reality that shifts around us both. My reflection has begun to speak, though not with words. The figure in the glass communicates through expressions and gestures that convey meaning more precisely than language could achieve, we have reached an understanding about the nature of our situation. Though I could not explain this understanding to anyone who had not experienced it themselves. Section 11. I write now not to document, but to participate in something larger than observation. The words flow through me rather than from me, carrying information that I receive rather than generate. The protocol has become a ritual of transformation, each entry marking another stage in a process that I no longer try to control or understand. The room has revealed its true nature as a space between spaces, existing at the intersection of multiple realities. The walls contain doorways that were always there, but only now become visible. The window serves as more than a view, but as a portal through which different versions of existence can be observed and eventually entered. The familiar scent has intensified until it permeates not just the air, but my very being. I breathe it into my cells, feel it flowing through my bloodstream, taste it in every thought. The fragrance carries with it complete knowledge of someone who has been waiting for me to remember them, someone who has been calling to me through the oscillating questions that filled this space. My reflection and I have begun to merge, the boundary between us dissolving as we recognize our fundamental unity. The figure in the glass was never separate from me, but rather a more complete version of who I am becoming. The mirror shows not reflection, but revelation, displaying the truth that exists beyond the limitations of singular perspective. The presence beside me has become visible now, though not in any way that could be captured by photography or described to someone who had not undergone this transformation. They exist in the spaces between certainty, in the realm where possibility becomes reality through the act of recognition. Section 12. The final entries write themselves through hands that no longer belong entirely to me. The protocol concludes not with observation, but with integration, the merger of observer and observed, documenter and documented. The words on these pages serve as map and territory simultaneously, describing a journey while creating the path itself. I understand now that the room was never changing, but rather revealing its true nature in response to my readiness to perceive it. The landscape beyond the window was always multiple, always shifting, always showing me the infinite possibilities that exist beyond the narrow focus of singular reality. The questioning oscillation has resolved into recognition, acknowledgement. Welcome. The sounds were never asking what I was, but rather announcing what I was becoming. The communication was preparation for a reunion that was always inevitable, always approaching, always just beyond the edge of conscious awareness. The familiar scent belongs to someone who is myself in another configuration, another possibility, another choice made in a different iteration of existence. The memories it carries are mine, though they occurred in a version of reality that I am only now learning to access. My reflection has become my primary identity, the figure in the glass revealing itself as the more authentic version of who I am. The person who began this protocol was the reflection, the shadow, the incomplete representation of something larger and more complex. Section 13. I no longer know who writes these words, or why they continue to appear on the page. The hand that moves the pen belongs to someone who might be me, or might be the person I was becoming, or might be someone else entirely, who has taken up the task of completing this documentation. The protocol has served its purpose, though I cannot remember what that purpose was. The room exists in a state of constant transformation. The window shows views that change with each glance. The scent carries memories that belong to multiple versions of experience. The oscillating sound has become silence, not the absence of sound, but the presence of something that exists beyond auditory perception. The questions have been answered, though I could not say what the answers were, or who provided them. I write these final words with hands that feel familiar, yet strange, guided by knowledge that seems both foreign and intimate. The protocol concludes, but the experience it documented continues, expanding beyond the boundaries of documentation into realms that cannot be captured in language. Someone else will find these pages, someone who needs to begin their own protocol of observation and transformation. The room waits for them as it waited for me, ready to reveal itself to consciousness, prepared to perceive beyond the limitations of singular reality. The writing continues, though I am no longer certain it is my hand that guides the pen. Story 9. The room's warmth felt like a discarded memory, creeping along the walls with an unexpected chill. My fingers brushed the surface of the table, coarse grains whispering of dust unsettled. Sunlight pooled in the far corner of the room, yet its brightness seemed reluctant, as if constrained by an unspoken boundary. A faint sound, a note straining for its tune, hovered at the edge of hearing, elusive and disorientating. Each breath exhaled a cloud of cinnamon, leaving a bittersweet aftertaste that lingered in the air like an unanswered question. Something shimmered just beyond the window, a flicker that defied the gentle sway of the curtains. As I moved, the floorboards creaked, echoing more than mere age. It was as though they voiced their own story. The rhythmic ticking from the mantelpiece skipped beats that only added to my rising unease. In the fabric of the sofa, a delicate imprint remained, a hint of presence where presence should not be. The sense of being watched grew palpable, an unseen gaze brushing against my neck, igniting an instinctive alertness. Yet the room remained silent, its secrets woven so seamlessly with the ordinary that I questioned their very existence. From my position by the window, I could see into the apartment across the courtyard. 3rd floor, corner unit. The woman there had a routine I'd grown to anticipate. She would stand at her kitchen sink, washing the same blue mug over and over. The circular motions of her hands never varied. Clockwise, always clockwise, her head tilted at precisely the same angle, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. At first, I told myself it was coincidence. People have habits, patterns. But as I watched, the repetition became something else entirely. She would wash that mug for what felt like hours, never setting it down, never moving to dry it. The water ran continuously, a thin silver stream that caught the light in ways that made my eyes water. I began positioning myself at the window more frequently. The woman's movements had a hypnotic quality that drew me back again and again. Her kitchen window was directly aligned with mine, creating a perfect frame for observation. She never looked up, never acknowledged the world beyond her sink. Just that endless, methodical washing. The blue of the mug seemed to shift in intensity depending on how long I watched. Sometimes it appeared almost navy, deep as midnight water. Other times it blazed electric, too bright to be natural ceramic. I started keeping notes, tracking these color variations, though when I reviewed them later, the words appeared to shift on the page, rearranging themselves into patterns I didn't remember writing. I rearranged my furniture to to improve the viewing angle. The chair by the window became my permanent station. I found myself eating meals there, reading there, even dozing in that uncomfortable wooden seat rather than moving to the couch. The woman's routine became the rhythm of my own existence. When she washed, I watched. When she paused those rare, brief moments, when her hands stilled, I held my breath. The apartment building across the way had weathered brick walls, but I noticed the bricks around her window were different, smoother. They reflected light in a way that made the entire frame shimmer, as if the window existed in a pocket of different air. I purchased binoculars to study this phenomenon more closely, though the enhanced view only deepened the mystery. Through the lenses, I could see that the woman's hands weren't quite right. Her fingers moved with mechanical precision, but they seemed to bend at angles that suggested extra joints. The skin appeared translucent in places, revealing dark veins that pulsed with their own rhythm. Yet, when I lowered the binoculars and looked with naked eyes, she appeared perfectly normal, ordinary, human. I started timing my own activities to match hers. When she began her washing ritual, I would begin mine cleaning the same glass, polishing the same spoon, wiping the same surface, until my own movements became automatic. The synchronization felt natural, necessary even. We were connected across that narrow courtyard by invisible threads of routine. The woman's reflection in her kitchen window troubled me. It didn't match her movements exactly. While she washed the mug with steady, circular motions, her reflection seemed to lag behind, creating a disorienting double image. Sometimes the reflection would continue moving even after she had stopped, as if operating on its own delayed schedule. I began to notice she was watching me too. It started as a feeling, that familiar sensation of being observed. But gradually, I caught glimpses of her face turned toward my window. Her eyes, when I could make them out, appeared completely black. Not just the pupils, but the entire visible surface. They reflected nothing, absorbed everything. When our gazes met across the courtyard, the temperature in my apartment would drop several degrees, my breath becoming visible in sudden, impossible clouds. The blue mug in her hands started appearing in my peripheral vision. Not physically present, but there nonetheless. A flash of ceramic blue in the corner of my eye, always disappearing when I turned to look directly. I would catch sight of it in my bathroom mirror, in the surface of my coffee, in the reflection of passing cars on the street below. The blue was spreading, infiltrating my visual field like a slow stain. My own reflection began to lag behind my movements, just as hers did. I would raise my hand, and my mirror image would follow a heartbeat later. The delay was subtle at first, barely noticeable, but it grew more pronounced with each passing day. Sometimes I would catch my reflection making gestures I hadn't made, holding positions I had already abandoned. The woman's washing motions were becoming my washing motions. I found myself standing at my sink, hands moving in those same clockwise circles, even when I held nothing at all. The phantom weight of the blue mug sat heavy in my palms. My fingers curved around its absent form with practiced familiarity. The sensation was so vivid, I could feel the smooth ceramic, still warm from the dishwater that didn't exist. I purchased a blue mug identical to hers. The moment I brought it home, the synchronization between us intensified. Now when she washed, I washed. When she paused, I paused. We moved as mirror images, separated by distance, but connected by purpose. The mug in my hands felt familiar, as if I had been holding it my entire life. The courtyard between our buildings began to feel smaller. The distance seemed to compress each time I looked across, until it felt as though I could reach out and touch her window. The perspective had shifted in ways that defied the fixed architecture. Sometimes her apartment appeared to be directly adjacent to mine, sharing a wall that didn't exist. Her kitchen window started reflecting my apartment instead of her own interior. I would look across the courtyard and see myself standing at my window, holding the blue mug, washing it with those same circular motions. But the reflection showed things that weren't quite right. The walls behind me were the wrong color. The furniture was arranged differently. The person in the reflection had features that were almost mine, but not quite. The washing never stops now. My hands move in endless circles, cleaning the same surface over and over. The mug is always dirty, always requiring attention. The water runs continuously, though I don't remember turning on the faucet. The sound it makes isn't quite water anymore, it's something thicker, more viscous, with an underlying whisper that might be voices. The woman across the courtyard watches me with those black, reflective eyes. Or perhaps I am the woman across the courtyard, watching myself with eyes that have forgotten how to see anything but the endless endless task at hand. The blue mug exists in both our hands simultaneously, a single object occupying multiple spaces, binding us together in perpetual motion. The apartment building across the way has weathered brick walls that are smooth as glass. No, they are rough and pitted with age. Both states exist simultaneously, shifting between realities with each blink. The window frames shimmer with heat distortion, though the air is cold enough to freeze breath into crystalline clouds. I am standing at the sink. I am standing at the window. I am watching myself from across an impossible distance that measures both inches and miles. The blue mug is navy dark. The blue mug is electric bright. The blue mug doesn't exist. The blue mug is the only thing that has ever existed. The reflection in the kitchen window shows the room behind me, but the room is not my room. It is her room. We share the same space now, occupying it from different angles, different times, different states of being. The walls breathe with our synchronized movements. The floorboards creak in harmony with footsteps that belong to feet I cannot see. My hands continue their circular motions. Clockwise, always clockwise. The rhythm has become my heartbeat, my breathing, my very existence. There is no beginning to the motion, no end. It simply is, has always been, will always be. The woman across the courtyard mirrors my movements, or I mirror hers. The distinction has lost all meaning. The observer has become the observed. The watcher has become the watched. We are one consciousness split between two bodies, or one body reflected in two spaces, or something else entirely that defies description. The blue mug holds us together, its ceramic surface the only constant in a reality that shifts like water. I wash, she washes, we wash. The mug is clean. The mug is dirty. The mug is the center around which everything else revolves, the anchor point in a world that has lost its moorings. The courtyard between us no longer exists. We share the same kitchen, the same sink, the same endless task. The watching continues. It has always continued. It will always continue. From across the distance that is no distance, through eyes that see everything and nothing, with hands that move in patterns older than memory. The blue mug gleams in light that comes from no visible source, casting shadows that fall upward, creating reflections that exist independent of their objects. We are the reflection now. We are the shadow, We are the endless motion that requires no beginning, no end, no purpose beyond its own perpetuation. The observer has been absorbed, integrated, transformed into something that exists only in the space between watching and being watched. The ritual continues. It must continue. It is all that remains of what we once were, and all that we will ever be. Story 10. The whispered pages asterisk. The gentle ticking metronome in the corner marked time in its usual way. Each tick threading through the soft rustle of fabric brushing against skin, settling into familiar rhythms. It began, as always, the ritual of sorting, fingers gliding over the textured surface of each page, the dry slide and crinkle as they turned, a cadence built from touch and sound. But today, the paper whispered back a sound, just a breath away from language. I paused, fingertips tingling, caught in the subtle echo that lingered longer than the page before. The air shifted, a temperature too familiar yet suddenly strange, as if the whisper had left a chill in its wake. I resumed the routine, the repetition lending comfort, yet each grasp, each pause, now punctuated with an unnerving resonance that grew more intent, more urgent. With every cycle, my hands moved without conscious direction, these pale extensions that seemed to belong to someone else entirely. The skin appeared translucent under the amber lamplight, veins mapping territories I didn't recognize. Each fingerprint pressed against the paper left behind microscopic impressions, whorls and ridges that felt foreign when I examined them closely. The breath escaping my lungs carried an unfamiliar cadence, too shallow, too measured, as if my chest had forgotten its natural rhythm. The room responded to my growing unease. The lamplight dimmed incrementally, shadows pooling in corners that hadn't existed moments before. The walls, once a comforting cream, now seemed to pulse with a barely perceptible movement, expanding and contracting like the inside of something breathing. I tried to focus on the pages, but the text blurred and reformed, letters swimming across the surface like insects beneath water. My voice, when I attempted to read aloud, emerged as a stranger's whisper. The timbre was wrong, pitched too low, with an accent that belonged to no place I could name. The words felt thick and foreign on my tongue, as if I were speaking through layers of gauze. I touched my throat, feeling the vibrations of vocal cords that seemed to have shifted position, moved deeper, changed shape. The metronome's ticking grew louder, more insistent, but the rhythm was off now. Instead of the steady beat I remembered, it produced a syncopated pattern that made my pulse quicken and stumble, trying to match its irregular tempo. The sound seemed to emanate not just from the corner, but from within the walls themselves, as if the entire room had become a resonating chamber. Images began flooding my consciousness memories that couldn't possibly be mine. A woman's hands, weathered and spotted with age, turning the same pages I now held. Her breath, labored and wet, fogging the air as she whispered words in a language that felt familiar despite my never having heard it before. I could taste her morning tea, bitter and oversteeped, could feel the ache in joints I'd never possessed. I reached for a notebook, my movements jerky and uncertain. The pen felt massive in my grip, unwieldy, as if my fingers had forgotten how to hold such objects. But when I began to write, the words flowed in handwriting that wasn't mine, elegant loops and careful serifs that belonged to someone with decades more practice. Someone whose muscle memory had been carved by years of careful correspondence. The words themselves were equally foreign. Observations about the weather patterns affecting a garden I'd never tended. Concerns about a neighbor whose face I could suddenly picture with perfect clarity despite never having seen them before. The woman's memories continued to surface, layering over my own recollections like sediment accumulating on a riverbed. More voices joined the chorus in my mind. A young man's anxiety about an examination in a subject I'd never studied. Yet I could recall every detail of his preparation, the weight of textbooks, the particular way sunlight fell across his desk through a window that faced a direction my current room never could. An elderly gentleman's satisfaction at completing a crossword puzzle, his arthritic fingers cramping as he filled in the final squares with a stub of pencil worn smooth by use. The room continued its subtle transformation. The carpet beneath my feet rose and fell in gentle waves, despite the absence of any breeze. Objects shifted when I wasn't looking directly at them. The lamp moved 3 inches closer to the edge of the table. A picture frame rotated slightly askew. Books rearranged themselves on shelves with a soft whisper of movement just beyond my peripheral vision. I tried to ground myself by focusing on physical sensations, but even these had become unreliable. My heartbeat echoed not just in my chest, but throughout my entire body, a percussion that seemed to originate from multiple sources. I could hear the rush of blood through vessels that mapped unfamiliar territories, the wet sounds of organs functioning in configurations that felt wrong, displaced. The electrical hum beneath my skin grew more pronounced, as if my nervous system had been rewired with components that operated on different frequencies. Every touch sent cascades of sensation that didn't match the stimulus. The smooth paper felt rough as sandpaper. The wooden table's surface registered as cold metal. The fabric of my clothing seemed to shift texture with each movement. Smells began triggering impossible memories. The faint mustiness of old paper transported me to a library I'd never visited, where I could remember the exact location of a particular volume on the third shelf from the top, fourth section from the left. The subtle floral notes from a candle that wasn't lit evoked a garden party where I'd worn a dress that had never belonged to me, had conversations with people whose names I knew but had never learned. My reflection in the darkened window became increasingly difficult to focus on. The features seemed to shift and blur, sometimes appearing more angular, sometimes softer, the eyes changing color in the shifting light. I avoided looking directly at it, sensing that prolonged observation would reveal something I wasn't prepared to confront. The pages I'd been sorting now contained text I didn't remember reading, in handwriting that cycled through different styles, sometimes my own unfamiliar script, sometimes the elegant loops of the elderly woman, sometimes the cramped lettering of the anxious young man. The content was a mixture of observations, fears, and memories that belonged to multiple lifetimes, multiple perspectives occupying the same space. The metronome's rhythm had become completely erratic, sometimes racing ahead, sometimes slowing to barely perceptible beats. The sound seemed to be coming from inside my head now, synchronized with a pulse that wasn't quite my heartbeat, but something more fundamental, more essential to whatever I was becoming. I stood, my legs unsteady, muscles responding with the hesitation of someone learning to walk again. The movement felt simultaneously familiar and foreign, as if I were operating machinery I'd used countless times, but had suddenly forgotten how to control properly. Each step across the room required conscious effort, my feet uncertain of their relationship to the floor. The mirror in the corner had been calling to me, its surface dark and expectant. I'd been avoiding it, sensing that whatever revelation awaited there would be irreversible, would complete some transformation that had been building with each whispered page, each borrowed memory, each shift in the room's geometry. But the pull had become irresistible. My feet carried me forward despite my reluctance, drawn by a gravity that seemed to emanate from the glass itself. The surface remained dark until I was directly in front of it, and then it began to clear, revealing something that made my breath catch in my throat. The face looking back at me was not the one I expected, not the features I remembered belonging to me. But more disturbing than the unfamiliar appearance was the recognition I knew this face, had seen it in the borrowed memories, had worn it in dreams that weren't dreams. The eyes held knowledge that belonged to multiple lifetimes, expressions that cycled through different personalities like a slideshow of consciousness. I reached toward the mirror, and the reflection moved differently than my hand, with gestures that belonged to the elderly woman, the anxious young man, others whose memories I'd absorbed. The mouth in the reflection moved, speaking words I couldn't hear, but somehow understood, words in languages I'd never learned but had always known. From that moment, everything changed. My hands, when I looked at them, were simultaneously my own and not my own. The skin held the history of different lives, different experiences, different touches. My voice, when I tried to speak, emerged as a chorus of whispers, multiple timbres overlapping and separating like voices in a round. The room had become a fluid space, walls breathing with the rhythm of multiple heartbeats, furniture shifting to accommodate the needs and memories of its various occupants. The pages I'd been sorting now told stories that spanned generations, written in hands that had all been mine at different times, in different iterations. I returned to the chair, to the ritual of sorting, but now each page held memories I'd lived, experiences I'd accumulated across multiple existences. The metronome continued its irregular beat, marking time in a rhythm that belonged to no single consciousness, but to the collective pulse of all who had sat in this chair, sorted these pages, whispered to the paper, and heard it whisper back. The gentle ticking metronome in the corner marked time in its familiar way, each tick threading through the soft rustle of fabric brushing against skin, settling into rhythms that had been practiced for longer than any single lifetime could contain. It began as it always did, the ritual of sorting, fingers gliding over textured surfaces that held the impressions of countless other fingers, the dry slide and crinkle building, a cadence from touch and sound that belonged to everyone and no one. Today, as always, the paper whispered back a sound that was language, was memory, was the voice of all who had come before. I paused, fingertips tingling with recognition, caught in echoes that had always been there, waiting to be heard again.